Okay, so welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works, right? You sent in some fascinating stuff, and this one really caught my eye.
Yeah, I mean, wow. Talk about a rabbit
A
hole.
YouTube Q&A called 001 ENQ&A Day, Questions, Answers, Reincarnation Cycle, Team Grifasi Live. And it's from the Calogero Grifasi Investigations English channel. So yeah, reincarnation, big topic.
And what's really cool is it's just raw.
Hmm.
It's not like some polished presentation or anything. It's people like you and me asking questions in the chat in real time and, some pre-submitted stuff too. You get that sense of what people are really wondering about when it comes to reincarnation.
Totally, like straight from the source. So let's dive in. What are we hoping to take away from this deep dive?
Okay, well, let's try to walk away with a solid understanding of the main ideas that come up, right? The possibilities that maybe we haven't thought about before, and the questions that this Q&A sparks about reincarnation, about living multiple lives at the same time, and really about the nature of reality itself.
Okay, big stuff. So to get us started, Juliana asked, are the reincarnations that we think of as past or future actually happening simultaneously and in parallel?
Whoa. Okay, so this is a question that goes deep into how we understand time, right?
Hmm.
And the Q&A makes a really important distinction between what we experience in the physical world, in everyday life, and what might be happening in what they call the etherical dimension. So for you, the listener, this distinction is super important if you want to really grasp the possibilities we're about to explore.
Yeah, it's kind of like stepping outside the box you're used to. Okay, so you're walking around, you're living your life, and time seems to move in one direction, one thing after another, right? You eat breakfast, then you go to work or whatever. It's pretty straightforward. But in this etherical dimension that they're talking about, things get, well, kind of wibbly wobbly.
Exactly. Like imagine timelines, not as a straight line, but more like a river. It's flowing, but there are currents and eddies and different things happening within that flow.
So we're used to thinking of past lives, present life, future lives, all happening in order. But what they're saying is, from that etherical perspective, you could actually have different lives, different experiences, all happening at the same time. It's just that from where we're standing now, stuck in this physical world, we see them as happening in a sequence.
Exactly. And that means, for you, listening, that feeling you get like you've lived before, or even a strong hunch about what's going to happen, that might actually be connected to these simultaneous lives.
Yeah.
Pretty wild, what a...
Totally changes how you think about those deja vu moments. So basically, it all depends on your point of view, right? Like where you're standing when you're looking at this whole reincarnation thing. Your perspective in the physical world shapes how you see time and therefore how you see these different lives.
Yeah, it's like if you only ever looked at the shadow of a 3D object. You'd never fully understand the whole thing. You'd only get a limited view.
Okay, so Claudia's question takes this idea in an even more mind-blowing direction. She asks, can a core part of us split into fragments and reincarnate as multiple beings in different lifetimes, not as a complete whole?
Oh, man. Now we're talking.
Oh,
So
yeah?
now we're not just talking about you living multiple complete lives at the same time, but the idea that you, your essence,
Yeah.
could be experiencing reality in multiple fragmented ways at once. It's kind of like, imagine a light source, right?
Yeah.
But instead of one beam, it sends out multiple beams in different directions.
So it's not just you, as you think of yourself now, living multiple lives, but pieces of you having these separate experiences. Okay, I need a moment to process this.
Take your time. I mean, this really challenges how we define our individual identity, right? If
Mhm.
part of you can exist and have experiences independently, then what does that mean about the whole you that you identify with right now?
So we may not be as solid and singular as we think. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. A pre-submitted question was, is it possible for someone to reincarnate into an animal, a plant, a bug? I mean, I think we've all wondered that at some point, right?
Definitely. It's one of the first things that comes up when you start thinking about reincarnation. And in the Q&A, they give this really broad answer initially. They say, in the infinite, everything is possible. Which, when you really think about it, makes sense. The universe is limitless, so why not?
I mean, logically, it makes sense. But then they sort of zoom in a bit. They talk about the idea of an evolutionary journey for souls, and that's where it gets really fascinating. They suggest that experiencing life as different things, plants, animals, and so on, that could be part of a really long process of development for a soul or an identity.
And what's important for you here is that they emphasize the idea of gradual development.
Mm-hmm.
Your DNA, the experiences you accumulate, those things matter. So suddenly jumping from being like a flower to a horse to a human, that's presented as pretty unlikely. There are just too many differences biological and experiential to make that kind of leap in one go.
It's like trying to learn calculus before you've even learned basic math. You got to build up to it.
Right. But here's a twist for you. They mentioned that maybe, just maybe, genetic engineering or even alien technology could make those jumps possible.
So like a shortcut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's a catch. They said that if you're suddenly put into a form that your consciousness isn't prepared for, that could cause some serious internal friction. Like, imagine if you're a simple little organism, then boom, you're a human with all these complex thoughts and feelings. That would be intense.
Yeah, sensory overload on a cosmic scale.
So this raises a really interesting point.
Yeah.
How important is the match between your consciousness and the physical body you're in? If there's a mismatch, that could make for a pretty rough experience.
Food for thought, for sure. Okay, let's go back to Juliana. Her next question, after clarifying a bit, was about our relationships with these other lives. She asked, is it okay to have a relationship, like a connection, like a friend, with your other incarnations?
And the answer is a very reassuring yes. The idea is that on a deeper level, beyond the physical stuff, your core being is already connected to all of its experiences, past, present, and future. So that connection's already there.
It's just a matter of tapping into it.
Yeah. And they even mention that some people use hypnosis to try to explore and connect with those other aspects of themselves. So not just theoretical, you might be able to actually experience these connections.
That's pretty cool. It makes you wonder what those conversations would be like.
Right. Now here's something interesting. They suggested that if you feel isolated or cut off from your other incarnations, it might be because you feel vulnerable. And the solution is to recognize your own inherent strength and power. It's not about disconnecting. It's about feeling safe and secure in that awareness.
So it's an internal shift. Okay, this next one's from Last Timer, and it's got a bit more of an edge to it. Last Timer asks, can we trick the tricksters to incarnate? And for you, the listener, this brings up some pretty negative feelings about reincarnation, right? Like you're being manipulated or tricked into this cycle.
Yeah, it implies that it's a bad thing, that someone's pulling the strings. But here's what's interesting. The response reframes the whole idea. They suggest that the reincarnation cycle itself isn't inherently good or bad. It's all about your individual perspective and how you feel about it. So what one person sees as a trap, another person might see as a chance to learn and grow.
It's like anything else, right? Your experience of it depends on your attitude going in.
Exactly. And the discussion emphasizes your own power. It talks about how individuals, especially through techniques like hypnosis, can discover their ability to influence their own reality. You might be able to change your karmic patterns and even step outside the reincarnation cycle entirely if you want to.
And remember, when they talk about karma, they mean the energy left over from your past actions, good or bad. It's not like some cosmic punishment system. It's more about cause and effect.
Right. So for you, Last Timer, and for everyone listening, the answer to tricking the tricksters is yes, it's possible. But it's not about outsmarting someone. It's about understanding how things work on a deeper level and operating from a place of personal power. Once you know the rules of the game, you can play it differently.
Makes sense. So on the topic of multiple realities, a follower asked, can incarnations also happen in parallel world universes at the same time as the one on Earth? So basically, could you be living in multiple universes simultaneously?
Okay, so now we're back to some really mind-bending ideas. The first response sort of echoes what they said earlier. From our everyday perspective in the physical world, it's tough for our rational minds to wrap around the idea of being in two completely different universes at once. It just doesn't compute.
Yeah, it defies logic as we know it. But then when they shift back to that etherical viewpoint, the possibility of existing across different spaces and times at the same time becomes, well, a little more understandable. The limitations of the physical world just don't apply in the same way on that level.
It's like those rules just don't exist there. And they even shared a story about a client who had glimpses of life fragments in multiple timelines. And interestingly, they said that this kind of experience could be very draining if it's not aligned with the rules of our physical reality.
Too much multidimensional multitasking.
Yeah, imagine trying to juggle multiple lives with completely different rules. So for you, this suggests that even though these possibilities exist, you might need some level of integration or coherence to make it work in the physical world you're currently in.
Okay, here's another one from Juliana that really gets me thinking. Do your other incarnations benefit from your evolution in this one?
And the answer seems to be a resounding yes, especially if you reach a certain level of awareness in this life. As you grow and learn, those positive changes can ripple out and benefit your other incarnations.
It's like your growth here is a rising tide that lifts all boats.
Yeah. And it's fascinating that just thinking about this question might mean you're already subconsciously aware of that connection.
It's like our souls are intuitively wired for growth and connection. Now, Emmer asked a question about birth dates and reincarnation. He wondered if the day you're born has any specific meaning in terms of your reincarnation journey.
And this led to a brief mention of numerology, acknowledging that within the infinite realm of possibilities, those connections could exist. But without being a numerology expert, they couldn't give a definite answer.
Makes sense. I mean, there are so many different systems and ways of looking at these things, which is what makes this whole topic so fascinating, right?
Yeah, this just shows how complex reincarnation really is. There are so many layers to unravel. And now, Alpha brought up something from a past discussion about different rules of reincarnation for Arcturians and reptilians. But since this discussion happened years ago, no one could remember the specifics.
Fair enough. Memories can be fuzzy.
But what's interesting is that they still tried to provide some logical context. They suggested that different types of beings, with different levels of consciousness and motivations, would probably have different rules governing their reincarnation. Like, reptilians are often associated with instinct, while Arcturians are seen as more humanoid and strategic. So, their experiences and how they engage with reincarnation would likely be different.
Okay, so different beings, different rules. Makes sense to me. And Alpha had a follow-up question from the chat. Alpha asked, like, some groups take a higher percentage of energy when you incarnate under their system, and the answer was a yes.
It's possible for some groups or systems to draw more energy during incarnation, depending on the agreements in place.
So not all reincarnation systems are created equal. Okay, this one is a bit of a heavy hitter. A post question asked, if you don't want to go into the light tunnel, what are the other options? I mean, this taps into that whole near-death experience phenomenon that a lot of people are curious about.
Right. And what's important here is that they presented the light tunnel not as a fixed reality, but more like a mental construct or a shared expectation. Since it's such a common story, you might be more likely to experience it.
Like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. But if it's a creation of consciousness, then you might be able to change or influence it. They emphasize that there are probably infinite possibilities beyond this one experience. Different dimensions, realities you can co-create. The options are vast.
So death isn't necessarily the end of the road. It could be a doorway to a whole new adventure.
Exactly. And Juliana had another great question. She asked, what should you do if an aspect of yourself from another reincarnation connects with you, but it's playing a negative role in your current experience? Like unresolved issues from a past life coming back to haunt you.
Oof. Yeah, those past life baggage fees can be hefty, so how do you deal with that?
Well, the answer reinforces the importance of your own power. Even if a negative connection pops up from another version of yourself, you have the power to choose how you respond to the here and now. You can take a positive stance and transform that negativity within your own reality.
So it's not about being a victim of your past lives, it's about taking control of your present. Now, a chat question brought up something I've heard before. Spiritual teachers talking about an electric grid that blocks souls from escaping beyond the sixth dimension. The question was if there's been any experience from sessions related to this.
Yeah, it's the idea that there might be barriers or limits in the afterlife. And they said that they have encountered similar concepts, although the specific dimension mentioned might vary depending on who you're talking to. But the important thing is that they see these dimensions as human ways of trying to understand more complex realities. Like, we like to put things in categories.
We like to label and define everything. It makes us feel more in control.
Right. But reality doesn't always fit neatly into our boxes. And with this grid idea, they said it would probably only affect individuals who are vibrating at certain frequencies. So those with different levels of consciousness, emotional states, mindsets, they might be able to bypass it completely.
So it's not a physical barrier, it's more like an energetic one.
Exactly. It's all about resonance. If your frequency doesn't match the grid, it might not even be an obstacle for you.
Okay, so Claudia asked a really big question. Can you leave the reincarnation cycle just by intending it? Or is there more to it?
And they were pretty firm on this one. They said, yes, you can absolutely leave the reincarnation cycle, but it has to be a deep, genuine intention. It's not just saying the words. It's about aligning your will on all levels of your being.
It's got to be a soul-deep decision.
Right. And they suggested some introspection to figure out if you have any lingering attachments or desires that might keep you tied to earthly experiences. They also mentioned the possibility of choosing to go to another dimension or planet. So there are options.
You're not stuck on this ride if you don't want to be. Now, Jeff asked a very practical question. What can you do right now to raise your frequency so you can pass this potential grid?
And the answer might surprise you. It's not about directly trying to manipulate your frequency with your conscious mind. It's more about understanding and clearing out those deeper hidden interferences.
It's like you can't just force yourself to vibrate higher. You have to deal with the stuff that's weighing you down first.
Right. And your subconscious mind is actually really good at handling this when you're in a good state. When you have a good understanding of things and you're free from those interferences.
It's like once you get out of your own way, your subconscious can take the wheel and do its thing.
Exactly. And Juliana asked you a personal question. She wanted to know, how would you like to reincarnate next? Have you given it any thought?
Honestly, I try not to think about it too much. I prefer to stay in the present moment and experience this life fully. The mystery of what comes next is part of what makes it exciting.
I get that. It's about embracing the journey rather than obsessing over the destination.
Exactly. Okay, here's a big one that ties a lot of these ideas together, Juliana asked. The majority of people who learn about the Matrix end up not wanting to reincarnate here anymore. So what reasons would they have to come back? Are there any? This speaks to that whole idea of the Matrix being a place of control and limitation, right?
Yeah, it often gets a bad rap. But the response emphasizes your individual power and choice. It's about remembering that you can shape your own experience, even within a system that might feel limiting.
It's like you can choose to be a player in the game or you can choose to be a pawn.
Exactly. And they pointed out that a negative outlook tends to lead to negative experiences. So if you see the Matrix as a bad thing, you're more likely to have a bad time and want to escape. But if you can shift your perspective, you might find that there are actually some pretty good reasons to stick around.
Like what? Spill the tea.
Well, they acknowledge that Earth has its challenges for sure, but there's also a lot of good here. And there's always potential for positive change. The idea is that the challenges of the Matrix can actually make life more interesting. They can push you to grow and learn and find balance.
So it's like a cosmic boot camp for the soul.
Something like that. And then they wrapped up with 2 quick questions from the posts. First, someone asked, can you reincarnate in the past? And the answer, based on what we talked about earlier regarding the flexibility of time, is yes, it's possible. And then another person asked if how you die influences your reincarnation. And the answer was that it can, but it's not always a straightforward cause and effect.
So basically, death is just another bend in the river, not the end of the stream. And then from the chat, there were 2 more questions. The first one was, is it possible to just say no to reincarnation or to reincarnate on another planet? And the answer was a very clear yes.
Yeah.
You have the power to refuse reincarnation.
And the last question was one that I'm sure many of you have wondered about. Someone asked, why do we forget everything when we reincarnate? And how come some people remember their past lives while others don't?
Yeah, that's a classic. What's the deal with that?
Well, the explanation offered was that forgetting could be part of the agreements within a system that needs people to not remember their past lives for it to function. Like, imagine if everyone remembered everything from their past lives. It would probably throw the whole system into chaos.
Yeah, this world would be pretty wild.
Right.
Yeah.
But people who have a higher level of consciousness or who are able to change those agreements, they might retain some memories. So it's not a hard and fast rule.
Fascinating. Well, that was quite a deep dive, and I hope you found it as enlightening as I did.
I know I did. What really stood out to me were those recurring themes of the fluidity of reality, the power of our consciousness, and the different ways we can understand this whole idea of reincarnation. It's mind-blowing, isn't it?
Totally. So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Think about the things in your life that feel absolutely fixed and unchanging. Now ask yourself, what if those things are actually more flexible than you think? How might a shift in perspective open up new possibilities for you, new ways of understanding your own journey? Until our next deep dive, keep exploring those possibilities and see where they lead you.
And keep sending in those questions. We love diving deep with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.